Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our workshop tonight. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted to have with you tonight. And our featured presenter is Dr. Jo-Ann Finkelstein, and she's going to be talking to you about her new book, Sexism and Sensibility, Raising Empowered, Resilient Girls in the Modern World. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for Dr. Jo-Ann Finkelstein. Take it away, Jo-Ann.
Thank you, Charlene, and thank all of you for being here. I grew up in Canada, where hockey is a national obsession. My three brothers loved hockey, and I wanted to play too. So I asked my parents for a hockey stick. To my delight, they bought me one. But to my horror, it was bright pink and looked like a toy version of my brother's. I've worked with girls and women for the last 24 years in my private practice. And what I discovered was that my pink hockey stick is every girl's story. Girls constantly get messages that make them feel unseen, unheard, or not taken seriously. I've witnessed how harmful these messages are to my patient's sense of self and sense of potential. These messages are like tiny psychological paper cuts that accumulate and become festering wounds of self-doubt. Growing up, when I'd get upset about the gender differences I noticed, people insisted they didn't exist, or they'd say, "You're too sensitive," or "Stop being dramatic." Classic comments I now know girls and women hear a lot. So, to avoid criticism, I learned to hide my feelings. It wasn't until years later, when I was doing a master's degree, that I began to truly understand my experience. I mentioned in a paper for my developmental psychology class that I'd been accused of overreacting when I felt demeaned. The professor scribbled in the margin, "That's what people say to talk girls out of their feelings." It was such a validating moment for me. Validating girls' experiences and opening parents' eyes are two reasons why I wrote my book and why I'm here today. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to step into the lives of two hypothetical girls I'll call Lily and Charlotte. I'll share their experiences, which are based on those of real girls. I'm going to talk about the subtle and not so subtle messages they get from us and our culture about who they are and who they should be. I'll also help you recognize gender bias in your parenting and how to respond with healthier, more empowering alternatives. So let's start with Lily. When Lily's parents found out they were having a girl, they were thrilled. Their first child, a boy, was a handful. He never sat still. When they learned their second child would be a girl, they thought, "Oh, it'll be nice to have an easygoing kid who sits around playing with calico critters." So what do you notice about that remark? These parents are already predicting how their baby's going to behave simply because she's a girl. Research shows that even in utero, mothers who know they're having a boy describe baby's movements as more vigorous, even when there are no objective gender differences in movement patterns. Now, let's peek into Lily's and her brother's nurseries. His is filled with sports, action figures, dinosaurs, and trucks. All that action and toughness say, "Little man, you're a fearless defender, capable of venturing out into this dangerous, action-packed world." It may also imply that little man must hide his vulnerability if he's to face down dinosaurs and bad guys, but that's for another talk. Lily's room is filled with fairies and butterflies, which foster grace and softness, and her closet is filled with pretty dresses, dolls, and tea sets. The unspoken message here is it's important to learn how to be a gracious, well-dressed hostess and mother. Of course, tea sets and dolls, like the color pink, aren't inherently bad. I never tired of my daughter's elaborate tea parties that she created for her dolls, and I could not wait for her to get old enough to use the dollhouse that I'd saved from when I was little. But if toys are part of what prepare children for their futures, then most boys are learning to build and solve problems, while most girls are learning to dress babies, bake, and look pretty. Their toy shelves are filled with kits for making your own, usually pink, soap, jewelry, lip gloss. Given free rein, most kids will naturally go back and forth between a toy kitchen and a toy car. So when we decide what a boy is and what a girl is, we place unnecessary limits on our children's imaginations and inclinations. Gender bias is harmful and can seep through parents' efforts to avoid gender stereotypes, as we'll see with Lily at age 5. We'll focus on 3 themes: Lily's parents grappling with the gender stereotypes they grew up with, the contrast between how they treat their son and how they treat Lily, and their limiting view of Lily's femininity. Lily's parents signed both kids up for local soccer teams and attended all the games. However, every time Lily fell or got a scrape, they got scared. Ingrained in them was the belief that girls are delicate. So their response was to coddle her. "Sweet girl, I'm so sorry. Come sit with me for a while." But when her brother got hurt, they'd say, "Shake it off, buddy. Get back out there." Now, depending on the child's personality and the situation, either parenting approach might be appropriate, but your approach shouldn't be based on your child's gender. When Lily started to say she was bad at soccer and became fearful of getting hurt, her parents consulted me. We came up with a plan. I call it R&R parenting, because all parents can use a little R&R, right? So R&R stands for recognize gender biased parenting and replace it with non-gender biased empowering strategies. So Lily's parents gave it a try. They told Lily, "We realize we've been treating you differently from your brother. We encourage him to keep going when he gets hurt or when he misses a goal. But when you get hurt, we make you feel like you're fragile, which just isn't true. We know if you keep practicing, you'll get better and you'll fall less. And when you do fall, you'll be just fine because girls' bodies are strong." It took some practice for Lily's parents to shift their thinking. Sometimes they'd catch themselves and say, "We don't know what we were thinking. Of course you can do this. Let's get you back out there so you can keep trying." The focus on girls' femininity comes at the expense of their physical prowess. By the age of 14, girls are dropping out of sports at twice the rate of boys. Those who stay in sports say what they like most is being strong. In other words, celebrating the capabilities of their bodies. Girls who drop out say what they liked was losing weight. It's true, not every kid is a sporty kid. But if we encourage and celebrate girls' physicality, even if it's just swinging on the monkey bars or raking leaves, what they'll remember is that they're strong and capable. When we shift their focus away from what bodies can do to what bodies look like and raise them with a narrow view of femininity, they'll accept the damaging and pervasive belief that boys and men are the dominant sex, strong and independent, and girls and women are vulnerable. So, what can we do to prevent this? We've got to make it normal for girls to be physical. So dads and moms, feel free to throw your toddler girls in the air. Wrestle with your school-age daughters. Don't reserve rough and tumble play for your sons. Research shows that girls not only enjoy it, but it helps protect them from anxiety. Challenge your daughters to a race as you do your sons. Go one-on-one in basketball with your older girls. Most of all, Celebrate your daughters being capable and strong. And if you notice you're treating them as more fragile than their brothers, use some R&R to step in and replace diminishing messages with empowering ones. The last thing that I want to point out about Lily at age 5 is how her parents stressed sharing for her, but encouraged her brother to be competitive. Lily's parents worried that on the soccer field, she was too aggressive and didn't share the ball enough. Yet, they saw the same behavior in her brother as a sign of competence. This presents a problem. If we continually emphasize sharing with girls and celebrate competition with boys, we inadvertently teach girls to suppress their competitive feelings. Sharing and achievement are important skills for all kids, regardless of gender. The kicker is, Lily's parents would agree. They weren't even aware they were reacting differently because bias is so deeply ingrained in all of us. In fact, without knowing it, we use achievement-related language like proud, win, and best with our sons. And with our daughters, we sing more and are more vocal about emotions. Whatever small differences exist between boys and girls, research shows that parents unconsciously widen that gap. Okay, are you ready to meet Lily at 14? At 14, Lily is full of emotions and opinions. In her not-so-secret opinion, her parents are idiots. She hates the way they chew their food and scowls at them during dinner, muttering, "Why do you have to chew like that?" Lily's parents are confused and worried. They lament, "Lily used to be so good. What happened?" They see her now as negative, opinionated, sexual, and unladylike. They want to mold her into a poised young lady, because a good girl becomes a good woman who will find a man, be a good wife, mother, and employee. Good is the gold standard for girls, but not for boys. We expect girls to accommodate others, even if it means suppressing their own needs and desires. They should be nice and never hurt anyone's feelings. They should be modest, which means downplaying what they're good at. And above all, they should be likable and agreeable. So they enter adolescence with all those expectations on their shoulders. Now, imagine you're Lily. Suddenly, hormones are wreaking havoc on your body and emotions. You're becoming your own person with your own opinions, but you're also secretly confused about who you are. And you're getting the message that you're not good anymore. That makes you anxious and angry. On top of that, you feel guilty because it's so hard to be good now. So what does Lily do? She obsesses about the effects of her small, everyday actions on her friends, because she doesn't want to be labeled a bitch or a drama queen or, heaven forbid, entitled. She agonizes over how to decline requests or delicately share an accomplishment. She's so consumed by being good and prioritizing others' needs and comforts, she loses touch with her own wishes and needs. Fitting into this mold is exhausting. No wonder Lily is angry so often. And Lily's mom is fanning the flames with remarks like, "You're so much prettier when you smile, and your hair is out of your face, and you stand up straight." Instead of listening to teenage girls and making room for their chaotic feelings, we inadvertently shut them down. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did a global examination of inequality. They found that adolescence is when girls' and boys' futures start to diverge. During adolescence, girls realize, consciously or not, that women aren't taken seriously. This comes with a catalog of moments in their lives. Moments of being interrupted, dismissed, ignored, moments of being scolded for being angry and mocked for having a strong feeling or any opinions. It's astounding that as early as 3rd grade, girls start asking for less than boys, especially when negotiating with a man. And that reflects the same gap in negotiations we see in adulthood. Without even realizing it, girls begin to feel like they aren't entitled to the same thing boys feel entitled to, such as speaking up, respect, and money. If we want our girls to grow into women who feel deserving of their share of public space, we need to teach them to feel deep down in their guts that they're entitled to it. Then they can help make the world better with their ideas and talents. Then they can negotiate more effectively for a job and equal pay and become our future leaders. In my chapter about entitlement, I outline 5 important voices that adults should help girls cultivate. Integrity. Help them trade the need to be liked for being respected. Resistance. Tolerate their anger and bad attitudes, which, by the way, doesn't mean tolerate rudeness. Ambition. Help them tolerate competition and envy, feelings girls often avoid for the sake of relationships. Authority. Teach them to be proud of their skill and authority. Too much humility is not a good thing. And economic self-sufficiency. Talk to your daughters about money as much as you do your sons. And for goodness sake, pay them the same amount for chores as their brothers. With our help, they will grow up experiencing a healthy sense of entitlement. Okay, now let's take a look at Lily's friend, Charlotte. One day, when Charlotte was 9, she was pretending to be pregnant. She pushed out her belly and waddled around, giggling. She said to her dad, "Look, I'm having a baby. I'm going to name her Charlie, and I'm going to let her eat all the candy in the world." But instead of joining in on the fun, her father reached over and poked Charlotte's belly and said, "Then she'll look pregnant too." "Dad," Charlotte exclaimed, "I don't really look pregnant. I'm just joking." "I know, honey." He hesitated, then added, "But does anyone ever make fun of you for being chubby?" How do you think that made Charlotte feel when she heard that remark? By the time I met Charlotte years later, she was battling an eating disorder. She traced it back to her father's words and told me, "I went to the mirror that day to see what he was talking about and never looked away." Now, you might think her dad was being cruel, but he later told me he was scared that her baby fat hadn't gone away and would cost her friends. Lots of parents tell me they feel stuck between a rock and a hard place as they try to prepare their daughters for how the world might interpret their appearance. They don't want to reinforce distorted perceptions, but at the same time, they want to protect their daughters from being hurt or ridiculed. But the wish to save her from suffering can cause more suffering. The majority of women I treat wish their parents had replaced diet tips with observations that their bodies were unconditionally good bodies. That's what science tells us is best too. When girls are labeled too fat by age 14, they have unhealthier eating thoughts and behaviors, regardless of their body mass index. And these effects are most pronounced when labeling comes from a family member. It's really challenging because even if we feel critical of our daughters' physiques, but don't say anything, research shows those girls will have lower body esteem. And even if we love their bodies but fret about our own weight or appearance, our daughters are still more likely to dislike their own bodies. But all is not lost. This is a perfect opportunity for a little R&R. Here's how I used it with my own daughter. I was so careful when she was growing up not to comment on my appearance and to focus on the great things our bodies could do. I'd say, "Aren't we so lucky to have strong legs to chase our dog, who loved to be chased?" But a couple of years ago, I noticed my daughter was getting really picky about pictures of herself. When I commented, she looked at me and said, "Well, you hate pictures of yourself too." She was right. I'd started noticing signs of aging in pictures and would say out loud, "Eek," or "Who's that?" So I consciously started replacing self-critical comments with positive observations like, "I like how I'm looking at you in that photo," or just "Cute shot." And you know what? To my surprise, I started to feel less critical of my pictures. Recently, I overheard my daughter's friend say to her, "We look so dumb in this picture." My daughter replied, "Nah, we look like we're having fun." Some of you may be thinking, I don't criticize myself or my daughter, which is admirable, but it's not just criticism that matters. Even compliments draw their attention to their bodies and emphasize that pretty is important. We compliment our daughters on their looks far more than our sons. We tease them about boys before they even know what a crush is. We unwittingly silence their strong opinions, and directly or indirectly, we encourage them to lose weight, which teaches them that their appearance and sexuality are what's important. Around the world, girls believe their most important asset is their appearance. In my book, I outline 6 ways that you can help your daughter achieve a positive body image. I want to highlight 2 that can reduce the overblown value we place on girls' appearances. First, practice body neutrality. Focus far more on their character and achievements than their appearance. We don't want their looks to be the center of their self-image. Second, teach them perfection isn't attainable, even if our culture makes them think it is. Teach them that chasing perfection inhibits creativity and is the enemy of spending time productively. Now let's meet Charlotte at age 12. I'm going to share some examples from Charlotte's life that may be uncomfortable to hear. They're about how girls are objectified and sexualized once they hit puberty. I'm sharing these to show that the road girls travel at this stage is filled with sexual and emotional landmines. Charlotte, like a lot of young girls, has been prone to urinary tract infections since she was little. It was always mortifying handing over her cup of urine to the lab technician, but this year was the worst. As he took it from her, he said to her mother, "Such a beautiful girl." And then to Charlotte, "You must call me when you're 18. Charlotte wanted to die, but her mother laughed and thanked him for the compliment. Was she supposed to feel flattered? Why didn't her mother think it was gross too? Charlotte felt confused, angry, and hurt. She went back to the lab for a couple more years, tolerating the technician's inappropriate remarks. They stopped seeming weird. After all, she was learning to associate that creepy feeling with being female. And like a lot of girls, she coped with sexual harassment by making it funny. So Charlotte made a big joke of the creepy lab technician's remarks, referring to him as Count Dracula because of his accent. She would pretend to imitate him by saying, "I want to drink your urine." One time, a man whistled at her on the street. She pulled her sweater tighter and yelled, "That's right, honey, better cover up." Even at school, boys commented on her body and touched her without permission. Once she disagreed with a boy in biology, and he said in front of everyone, "Maybe your boobs are getting in the way of oxygen flowing to your brain." Embarrassed, tears sprung from her eyes. She was angry at herself for being such a girl. Later that day, another boy from biology pushed into her from behind as she drank from the water fountain. She elbowed him and moved on. She tried to filter out incidents like these because she got teased if she reacted. On Charlotte's 16th birthday, an older boy she'd been eyeing wished her happy birthday and asked if she wanted to hang out after school. They got ice cream, walked around, and eventually leaned against a tree and kissed. It was the best birthday ever. But the next day at school, he didn't look at her. Then he started texting her on weekends after parties to come meet him. She would go because she was excited that a boy was attracted to her. Even though she didn't feel ready for a big commitment, she would have liked more than a purely physical relationship. She didn't realize what she wanted was respect. So she buried that part of herself and continued their sexual meetups. She wasn't going to be the needy girl who scared him away. After a lifetime of messages that your worth is dictated by your desirability to men, many girls feel lucky just to have a boy's interest. That was certainly true for Charlotte. And with years of ignoring unwelcome touches and comments and dissociating from their bodies, girls learn their bodies aren't really their own. As a therapist, I've had a front row seat to the poor, unsafe, and regrettable choices girls sometimes make in frantic attempts to maintain a romance. These choices take them far from home and into unknown neighborhoods late at night. These unhealthy choices put them alone with someone they don't know well enough to trust, or have them being sexual in uncomfortable ways, believing it will bring them love. Eventually, Charlotte became interested in being more sexual. She also felt pressure from the boy to do more. The next step she took is considered a rite of passage to adulthood these days: full frontal hair removal. It's the norm in porn, and many boys today find hair down there disgusting. Girls tell me it's prettier and cleaner and what boys expect. So Charlotte shaved off her pubic hair. Soon, without at least a little hair to protect her from bacteria, she got another UTI, something she'd been free of for several years. That's when Charlotte had her first panic attack. The UTI was a reminder of Count Dracula and the objectification and absence of control she'd come to feel over her body. And now Charlotte had chronic anxiety. We can't shield our daughters from sexism, but we can make sure they're more prepared for it than we ever were. In Sexism and Sensibility, I outline a two-pronged approach to girls' psychological and physical well-being. The first is to instill an understanding of boundaries and consent so that something undesirable is less likely to happen. The second is to cultivate the critical thinking skills girls need to detect gender bias and sexism. This will ensure that every choice they make, from pastimes to clothing to who they trust, rests on a deep understanding of their culture. The cornerstone of this approach is pleasure. If girls feel good in and about their bodies and believe their own pleasure is important, they'll be able to identify when something feels bad, wrong, or inappropriate, and trust their concerns are valid. In practical terms, that means help them understand bodily autonomy from a very young age. Teach them to tune into what they want and don't want, what feels good and what doesn't. There are endless teachable moments in the culture and in our own homes that we can use to help them spot and understand gender bias and sexism before they internalize it. For example, we can teach our daughters how to stand up for themselves when they're talked over. We can show them that we think what they have to say is important. Recently, a parent wrote to me after reading my book to say she realized she'd been shutting down her daughter's opinions. So she practiced some R&R. She told her daughter she thought she was doing that. Her daughter started to cry from the recognition because she knew she didn't feel heard, but she couldn't quite pinpoint why. To kick off tonight's conversation, we immersed ourselves in the lives of Lily and Charlotte, two hypothetical girls who faced very real experiences of gender bias and sexism. Lily's parents understood developing her physicality and spatial abilities were important and signed her up for soccer. But we saw how she was treated as more fragile, her potential taken less seriously, and later on, her negative emotions discouraged. Though her progressive parents would never have used the word princess, somewhere deep down they had that vision for her. Yet, with some new awareness and practice, they were able to change their responses, allowing for more hardiness and the whole spectrum of human emotions. I also shared Charlotte's story and the effect of being objectified and sexualized, both by her family and everyone else. To make the point that gender-biased parenting goes back generations and breeds confusion, I shared how Charlotte's mother wasn't brought up to confront or even register offensive behavior from men. So she didn't protect Charlotte from it, leaving her feeling alone and confused. We also saw how Charlotte struggled to develop her identity apart from the mounting pressure to be attractive to boys. Her choices and her preoccupation with her body were troubling, but not uncommon. Girls struggle to keep their internal compasses pointed in a healthy direction when sexualized messages are flying at them from all directions. These stories remind us that we must find a way to be there to help girls sort out the incredible confusion that comes with being a teenage girl in our society. And if you're grieving what a good girl she used to be, it's going to be hard to be helpful. As a culture, we're asking our daughters not only to perform in school and do all the extracurriculars, but she's under pressure to perform femininity, learning how to do her hair and makeup, be well liked, be attractive to boys, and deal with unwanted attention, all while managing a million brain and body changes. We have a critical role in educating our sons and daughters about gender bias and sexism, starting with identifying our own unconscious biases. We can also draw on everyday teachable moments, noting, for example, how girls are depicted on TV, and we can always ask ourselves, am I allowing her a healthy sense of entitlement? That may be what they need most from us. I leave you with the words of an empowered young woman, Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman. There is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you so much.
Oh, Jo-Ann, that last part just gave me chills. I was raised by a Canadian mother too, and the things that she said to you were just the things that my mother said to me. Get your hair off your face. You'd look so much better with a little makeup.
Yeah.
And as you say, I do think these messages go generation to generation, don't they? I mean, my son is raising a 2.5-year-old daughter, and I'm thinking that he's doing a really good job because he's raising her to be empowered and be who she is. It's a wonderful thing to see, but we don't always know. So, Jo-Ann, you start this book, which obviously you wrote for parents and caregivers. You yourself have a daughter and a son, yes?
Yes, I do.
Yes. So, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But in the first chapter, you talk about parents Camilla and Drew and their case study showing that parents sometimes unintentionally give sexist messages without knowing it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Even when parents feel that they're being progressive, what can happen?
Yeah, Camilla and Drew they came in for marital issues that very often stemmed from these gender stereotypes that they were living by. But for the most part, they were progressive in terms of sharing chores. They both worked. They didn't necessarily have very traditional roles. But things would come out in different ways, such as Drew, sort of had been socialized to sort of not care about anything. So the things that Camilla cared about, like, um, getting all the stuff for the beach, the hats and the toys and the sunscreen, he would see that as obsessive. But of course, if we talked about it, he wanted to shield their tender skin too, but it was like he sort of was projecting these wants onto her. But to fast forward to what happened with their kids, which is I think maybe what you're alluding to, is that Drew would use princess with his daughter. He revered his daughter, he loved his daughter, and he would use princess with her like it was her name. Welcome home, princess. How was school, princess? Um, and princess is a complicated word, right? Because it's often meant in the loveliest way. But research shows that when kids think of princesses, they think of beautiful, nurturing creatures, which is great, who are often requiring rescuing. So there's something fundamentally devaluing about using it for girls. Princesses are valued for those qualities, right? Rather than for being brave, smart, strong. And so if we refer to our daughters as princess, it might convey the idea that what we love about her is what's traditionally feminine about her. Um, so here's the other thing, though. At the same time, if his daughter was acting in a way that he didn't like, or his son was being a wuss, he'd call them princess in a derogatory way. So his use of princess really enforced stereotypical expectations for boys and girls.
I feel like I must have done something right because in the sixth grade, all my daughter's friends were dressed as Elsa or some other Disney princess, and my child dressed as a garbage can, literal plastic garbage can with the top of the can on her bike helmet. So there's that.
Which is so cool. But I also just want to say that I don't want to diminish the princess and the Elsa. I don't want to diminish feminine stuff, right? What we just
Yeah.
want girls to have access to the whole range of who there is to be. But I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, that's a really good point because I think that either we think, oh, that can't be a good thing to be calling our daughter princess. And as you say, if it becomes kind of a slur, then it's even worse. What do the girls think then, right? But it just seems like the Disneyification of girls, that princess thing, Halloween, it's kind of overwhelming in this culture. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you see, right? I mean, psychologists call it PFD, pink frilly dresses. Like there's an actual term for it because people were starting to say, like, I wear overalls. Why is my kid dressed like this? It must be biological.
Yeah.
But really it is, we know it's not because for, the last century, pink and blue have flip-flopped between, based on what the culture deemed feminine and masculine, right? So pink used to be a boy's color. Um, and then in the 80s with Disney and commercials, there was the real sort of driving home that pink is girl. And girls and kids don't have a stable sense of gender identity when they're very small, right? Around the time that we see all our girls start to dress up, they
Mhm.
think if I put on a pair of overalls, I'm going to turn into a boy. So they look around and they say, what makes me a girl? I'm told I'm a girl. What makes me a girl? So I'm going to put on pink and I'm going to put on dresses and I'm going to like sparkly stuff. And conversely, boys reject that because that's not boy enough, even though boys love sparkly stuff too.
They do indeed. And I started my career in education teaching at Stanford Psychology Lab Preschool. And we had huge classes, 31 kids, all
Mm.
kinds of kids. And we had boys who would come in and put on negligees every day, girls who would come in and put on, worker type clothes. Finally, I think they stopped having some of those very sort of gendered clothing in the dress up corner because parents were complaining. Even though we felt it was important for kids to choose whatever, the parents of the boys who were choosing negligees were not happy.
Yeah. That a lot of homophobia underpins sexism.
Right. And yet, when you teach as many young children as I did, and as many probably as you have seen kids, you do know that they come in all kinds of shapes, sizes, and flavors.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And we want to give them the freedom to figure out who they are without
Exactly.
these sort of constrictions. Yeah.
Exactly. So, one of the things that you mentioned is benevolent sexism. I love that term. Can you tell us more about what that means, Jo-Ann?
Absolutely. So, most of us strongly believe that hostile sexism is wholly inappropriate. But we're also raised to believe that benevolent sexism is okay because it appears to compliment rather than insult women.
Mm,
So examples include like chivalrous behavior,
mm.
like men picking up the tab at a restaurant and giving up their seat for women. On the surface, it seems perfectly courteous, but here's the thing, it perpetuates a sexual narrative where a man's in control and a woman adopts a passive role. Chivalry is like, it's actually based on the ideal knight ready to help the weak. So having dinner paid for may sound especially appealing to some girls, but if money is power, and it is, then paying is a way to exert that power. So I'm not like, I want to just make clear, I'm not suggesting that we instruct our daughters to never let a guy pay. I'm saying it shouldn't be about gender, right? Maybe the person who pays is the person who extended the invitation, or maybe they take turns, or the person who makes more money pays for the dinner. It's just that cultural ideas of who men and women should be powerfully shape heterosexual romantic relationships and promote the gender status quo, which we don't want to do anymore. There's actually, I'm thinking now that there's actually a phenomenon that research has dubbed the glass slipper effect, which means that the more a woman associates male romantic partners with chivalry, the less interest she shows in education, career goals, and earning money. So, one more form of benevolent sexism is putting women on moral pedestals,
Mm.
right? It's based on stereotypes of women as more compassionate, don't be assertive, intuitive, you lack logic and rational thinking, nurturing, you take care of the house, tidy, you're better at chores and your house and body should be neat, and beautiful. No wonder we objectify your bodies. Of course, these qualities in and of themselves, they're not bad, right? But they're used as a stranglehold on women and disguised as benevolence, right? Sort of behave in these specific ways or you're deviant.
Oh, I know. I was brought up hearing that my dad was so chivalrous because even when I was 2, he would open the car door for me.
Hmm.
It's hard to give up some of those pieces, but to be aware, right, of what the message is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, again, those things, like it's nice when someone opens the car door for you, right? But it doesn't have to be based on gender.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, because we don't want um, men to have to take on the active role and be pressured to take on the active role all the time, while women are pushed into this passive role, which does not serve them well in later relationships.
All right. This next question is one that I don't know about you, all you parents who are online, but this is a hard one. As you say, many parents today are better than their mother's generations were at not constantly criticizing our daughters' bodies, their weight, their makeup, their hairstyle, their clothing choices. We have some questions about clothing we're going to get to. But many of us forget how much of an example we are for our own kids. I remember
Mm.
standing in the mirror when my daughter was 16 and she looked at me and said, "You're not very nice to yourself."
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
they hear it, they get it. And even if we're trying to message more positively, would you comment on that? How powerful our modeling?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the mere, like, even if we're not so hard on ourselves, I think it's the mere fact that we hone in so often on our looks
Yeah.
that force our girls' attention to their appearances in a world that's already doing that so much.
Yeah.
We might say, I look so old in that picture. As I mentioned, my butt looks so big in those pants, or just demonstrating ways that we're conscious of our appearances by constantly reapplying lipstick or looking in the mirror. And it reinforces that pretty is important and fat is bad. And what we want them to focus on is what their bodies do and how they feel, not how they look to others. So here's the thing, though, right? Not only does focusing on their looks increase shame and anxiety about their bodies and put them at risk for eating disorders, depression, and sexual dysfunction, but self-objectification, which is when they start to do it to themselves, gets in the way of cognitive performance, right? Research shows that it usurps our cognitive resources, which makes it difficult to get into flow states necessary for that performance and achievement. So I always like to say to parents, if you compliment a girl, you'll improve her mood for a minute or two, maybe, but you'll impair her mental capacity. So think about that when you're tempted to tell your daughter that she looks cute before she leaves for school.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. And kind of in the same vein, we're right here by Stanford. Carol Dweck's work on mindset is everywhere. We know Carol's been dialing some of that back. But can you comment on your perspective on process praise? This piece about, as you say, praising is so hard to get a hold of.
Yeah, well, so when we praise a child for their good grades by saying, you must have tried hard, or your strategies worked, that's us using process praise, right? And letting them know that we believe that they'll succeed with effort. Or after, after a setback, if we ask them what they would do differently next time, that gives them a sense of control. But we're using person praise if we say, you're so smart, right? Which emphasizes a fixed quality. So they might come to believe that the source of their accomplishments are predetermined or fixed traits. Either they have it or they don't.
Yeah.
But the reason that it ended up in my book is because boys and girls receive the same amount of praise overall, but process praise accounts for 24% of praise that boys receive and only 10% of what girls hear. And the important part of that is that being given more process praise predicts development of a growth mindset and better academic achievement later on in their life.
So how and when is it appropriate? Because parents, we want to tell our kids that they're beautiful. How and when do you do that? Do you suggest, Dr. Finkelstein?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's natural for us because we do think they're beautiful. So I think it's natural, but I think it's so important to notice how often you're doing it. And are you commenting on her appearance so much more than your son's? Statistically speaking, you probably are because we do comment so much more on girls' appearances. The other thing is like when they're balled up in tears, right? And they are saying they're so ugly. It's so natural for us to want to say, but you're not, you're so pretty. I don't know what anybody's talking about. But they don't buy it. They've heard it or they've compared themselves to other kids or celebrities on social media. So really going for that is not the best way to tackle it. I think talking about the whole person and what a good person they are, and that we're so much more than our looks. And I think I'll add one more thing. I think the time to really say how beautiful they are is, maybe you've just had this big belly laugh with her, or you've just had this great conversation about climate change, and you say, you're so beautiful. And then they'll know you mean all of them.
Okay. That's good advice. I love that. I love that. I mean, I think about it all the time, and my children are young adults. Parents, it carries through. We have to keep working on it. So it may not surprise you, Jo-Ann, that our first couple of questions are about girls' clothing. So let's have at it. All right. Parent asks, can you please give us some insight into wearing skimpy clothes, both at school and after school, and how to navigate between autonomy of choice, not wearing something because it distracts the boys, versus the sexualized attraction that clothes can engender? So, what do you think about the way young girls dress today?
Well, I always say, and I say it throughout the book, it's really important to take the long game, right? Because what we're trying to do is not shame them, is not kind of side with the dominant culture that they're sexualizing themselves. And, so we want them to understand that the culture is looking at them in ways that they shouldn't, that they are getting these, like they think, well, this is my style, this is how I like it, and I want to fit in, right? And so it's hard to stop them from wearing a crop top when literally every one of their friends is wearing a crop top. But over time, we want them to understand that the culture is sexualizing them, that the culture is emphasizing their body over anything else about them. We want to, I see so many um, parents and daughters, mostly mothers and daughters, whose relationships are deeply affected because of fights about clothes.
Mhm.
And it's really sad because it should be us against the culture, not us against them.
Yeah.
But I completely sympathize with parents who are worried about their kids' safety, right? And so, you know, we can just be really honest with them and say, I am worried about your safety. I understand this is the trend. I understand this is what teenage brands are selling. But if you're going to be on the subway, I'd really like you to throw on some sweatpants. Um, or some parents are more comfortable saying, listen, I'm not okay with that at school because it makes you focus on your body, right? This is where I say share the research with them. And when you're focused on your body, you don't do as well in school. It's just a fact. And so, let's save that for the weekend when you're going out with a friend for dinner or whatever.
Okay. So make sure you have that conversation about what safety means and why you're saying it. Because as parents, that's our job, right? To keep our kids safe. So you're saying if you could tie the clothing thing to that more than, oh my God, you're not leaving the house in that.
Well, it's never so straightforward because, well, right, you want to have it before because if you do it as they're walking out of the house, you're going to shame them and make them self-conscious. So you want to have some parameters set up around that before that happens. But I also want to make really clear there's no research that shows a connection, an association between sexual assault and clothing,
Mhm.
right? People wearing everything from bikinis to burqas get sexually assaulted. And
Despite what the
so,
culture tells us.
I'm sorry, what?
Despite what the culture tells us.
Right, right. And so we want, the clothing thing is really about blaming the victim and feeling like we should, um, it's up to us to control men's temptation.
All right. Another question, kind of on the other side. Parent asks, what if you have boys? How should you talk to them about how to behave or act when girls are wearing skimpy clothes? That is how to educate the boys.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. Um, I think, and there is a whole section in there about boys because even though I was writing about girls, this sort of patriarchal culture and how we split up boys and girls and how we ask boys to look at girls, it is very relevant. So I love that question. Um, I think that we need to humanize girls for boys. We need to empathize with boys, right? They're becoming sexual beings. They like how girls look. They might be turned on, but that isn't why girls are dressing like that. I mean, it's really not. 99% of the time, it's to fit in, it's to look like the other girls, it's because they're appreciating their bodies, which
Mhm.
are developing. And so it's a boy's job to make sure that he doesn't objectify a girl, right? A lot of boys today say, well, she wouldn't dress like that if she didn't want me looking at her, but that's just not true, right? And he's got to take the cue from the girl, and that's a lot about learning the difference between um, between, flirtation and sexual harassment. And so there's a whole section in the book on how you talk to boys and girls about the difference between flirtation and sexual harassment.
All right. That is a really important chapter, everybody. Really beautiful book, easy to read, lots of stories, really fantastic. We've come to the end of our hour and there's just so many more things I'd like to ask you, Jo-Ann. We didn't even touch on social media, which is a whole nother thing. But I really just want to end by giving you a chance to tell us, based on your clinical work and the writing of this book and all the research you've done, what gives you hope for our girls today? For a decade, we've been talking about empowering girls, but now all of a sudden we're hearing about, oh, the poor boys, we need to take care of the boys. So what is happening?
And I do think we need to take care of the boys. I mean, I think boys are feeling very disenfranchised. They don't understand Me Too and its significance, which it really is significant, of course. So I think we do have to take care of the boys. But what gives me hope is that girls are on their way to understanding this. But a lot of parents say, but my daughter is more feminist than me. Um, and to that, I would say yes and no, right? They with progressive educations and what they're seeing online, they learn this sort of identity politics, my body, my choice. And it does, it gives me a lot of hope that they'll be able to say hands off.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a pressured sexual moment, having to say hands off during a pressured sexual moment is a lot harder in real life, which is why they need a parent in their corner, which is why they need a lot of this stuff talked about before it actually happens, before it becomes something that's happening in their real life. And so if it's a conversation in your house, if all of these things about the culture are a conversation in your house, they're going to be able to bring these situations to you. They're going to be able to talk about it with their friends.
Thank
And
you for that.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And parents, of course, in the chat, boys and girls both matter. Today, we're here talking about sexism and sensibility, but our job is to raise healthy boys and girls. So again, pick up a copy of this book, really wonderful. And yes, everybody who's asking, it will be on our video library because there's grandparents who want to talk with their granddaughters. And that's a great thing, Jo-Ann, because you're now sending that messaging down generations, and we love that. So thank you for a brilliant presentation tonight. Thank you, everybody, for being on with us and all your great questions. And we hope that you will come back and join us the next time. This was really great. As we end tonight, that little survey is going to pop up. We hope you'll take a second to do it. But love all those emojis, everybody. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Dr. Finkelstein, thank you for all your brilliance tonight and best wishes on your wonderful new book.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Take care.
Okay, take care.
Thank you,
Good night.
everyone.